Okay, enter progressivism. So this is a very different type of movement, and you'll see why in just a second here. But first, let's define this term. What was the progressive era? So the time period that is usually associated with this movement is the 1890s through 1920. So this is widespread political and social reform. They have some very lofty goals, eradicating these problems brought about by industrialization, urbanization, and corruption. So remember that we went through and we made a list of all of the problems that we're seeing in the cities as a result of the second industrial revolution. So, looking at child labor, massive poverty, this disruption between the workers' experience and the owners' experience, pollution, health problems, mental health being a big issue as well. So the list goes on and on and on. So this is the goal for the progressives, is to try to alleviate some of that. And so it does start as a social movement, but it will become a political one. So who are they? They're mostly middle class. Okay, so you're not going to have them coming from the lower class. They're too busy working multiple jobs. They don't have time to kind of pull back and say, let's see if we can fix society. So these are going to be middle class folks living in cities. A lot more people, especially women, are becoming college educated in this time period. And here's the real shift: the idea that government is not the problem. Government can be the solution. So it can be the vehicle or the tool for change. So they're really going to be focusing on these issues that we've been talking about in our previous Unit 6. So thinking about what's going on with the robber barons, fear of immigrants. We have a lot of immigrants coming in from Southern and Eastern Europe and Italy. In particular, they're seen as more inferior than, say, Western European immigrants that have been coming in previously, and they're really focusing on trying to get Americans to think pretty hard about what American democracy actually means. And this, again, as we talked about the Spanish American War, that calls a lot of what that definition is into question, now that we have expanded into an overseas empire. So, what does it truly mean to be a member of the American democracy at this point? We always want to have evidence for whether or not this movement is a success. Remember that they're going to be pulling up a lot of the platform planks from the populist movement, and they're really just expanding it. So they are going to be pretty successful. So we've got some nice evidence here. So we've got several constitutional amendments are going to be passed under their watch. So 17, 18, and 19. So the 17th Amendment is the direct election of senators. Finally, we have the people weighing in on who is actually going to represent them. So remember, previous to this point is that senators were being appointed by the state legislatures, which was really opening up, a huge can of worms for people like the robber barons to really weigh in on who should have those positions. So another great success of the progressives is a three-pronged reform: initiative, referendum, and recall. And we see this in play really anytime that we have an election, in California in particular. So initiative just means that new laws can originate with the people. So if you want to pass a new law, there's a process that you go through. You get enough signatures, and then you can take it to the state and get it put onto the ballot. Referendum is an up or down vote. Okay, so that's the second stage of that. Recall is if you've got an elected member that you think is not pulling their weight, they are not following what their constituents want to do, they can be recalled. So this is not terribly common, but it has happened in the past. California, of course, the most notable example there. So Governor Gray Davis was recalled a ways back. That is how we ended up with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the governor, as he was called. So there was a special election for that. So that is initiative, referendum, and recall. So again, initiative just means that new laws can originate with the people. Referendum, the people can vote on it. And recall, that elected members of Congress can be removed if need be. Again, this is a big departure from what we talked about before. So this is definitely not a laissez-faire government. This is hands-on, getting dirty, getting in the middle of everyday life. and trying to solve some of these problems like child labor and extreme poverty. We've got national leaders in this movement. We'll dig a little bit deeper into some of these folks a little bit later on. Obviously, Teddy Roosevelt will have an entire day or two dedicated to him. William Jennings Bryan, you've already been introduced to him before. He's going to continue to be a pretty major player as we go through Unit 7. Charles Evans Hughes, Supreme Court Justice, fighting Bob La Follette. You can see him to the right. So he's a reformer in Wisconsin. William Howard Taft, Woodrow Wilson will also be considered progressive presidents. So our real focus today is on these local leaders and what kind of impact they're having. So these are just a small sampling. So there's lots of progressives, lots of people getting involved in this, but these are definitely the ones to know. So Jane Addams, Alice Paul, Carrie Chapman Catt, who we've talked about previously with NASA, Booker T. Washington, W.B. Du Bois. No, it's not Dubois, it is Du Bois. And so we'll have an entire day dedicated to them as well. John Dewey, Mother Jones, and Margaret Sanger, and again, many, many others. So this is Alice Paul. She is going to be kind of taking on the militant wing of NASA. So she will split from NASA and Carrie Chapman Catt, and she will be setting up the National Women's Party. So this is going to be a thorn in Wilson's side and a big reason why he will end up telling Congress to pass the 19th Amendment. So more on her a little bit later on, but notable for setting up the Sentinels at the White House gate through World War I to agitate for rights for women to vote in the United States. This is an image that's been on the AP test pretty regularly. So the suffrage movement was always personified by the color yellow. And so you can see that, you can see women, kind of climbing out of these dark spaces, calling for the light of suffrage to come their way. So the states that are already white there are states where women could already vote in the state-by-state campaign. Right. Mother Jones, really well-known labor leader. She was a pretty creative thinker. So she would work with some of the men's labor unions and try to get the wives and families involved. So she would do things like setting up the wives and families on picket lines. Became a little bit harder for people to cross those picket lines to work as scabs when there were hungry children looking up at you. So this is a great quote by her. I met a man in prison once and asked him how he happened to be there. He said he'd stolen a pair of shoes. I told him if he had stolen a railroad, he would be a US Senator. So she definitely has some thoughts on our robber barons. Margaret Sanger gets started in the progressive movement as well. So she is the founder of today's Planned Parenthood. So she was agitating for women to be allowed to use birth control, which was illegal in virtually all states in the United States. So she will be arrested many, many times for even just passing out pamphlets about ways that women could control their own reproductive systems. She'll end up writing some pretty powerful essays about her experiences in jail and the many women that she ends up meeting in prison as well. John Dewey, he's a good name to know in terms of education reform. So education is not preparation for life, education is life itself. So really changing the way that education is functioning. He is trying to get out of this idea that we had talked about previously with Horace Mann, that this isn't just a preparation for working in a factory, that this should be doing something else entirely. This is in your document. I would definitely make sure that you go back and review this. This is a really nice summing up of all of the different types of programs that the progressive movement is getting involved with. So again, we'll have separate days on civil rights, conservation, women's rights as well, but definitely make sure that you review this infographic. One of the fascinating pieces about this movement is that it's made up of such a diverse group. So they all tend to come from the middle class, but you have kind of a motley crew here. So women's rights advocates are going to make up a pretty big percentage of this movement. So the agitation for women's suffrage is a really big piece of the progressive movement. Social gospelers, we talked about them last year, as well as the populists, laborers, social scientists, nativists, muckrakers, and socialists. So you've got the nativists in there, so things are going to get a little dicey, especially in terms of feelings towards immigrants, you're going to be seeing calls for kind of early eugenics programs as well, especially as far as immigrants are considered. So the progressives can be kind of a mixed bag. And so that's what you're going to be doing with your document work, is trying to answer that question: should we consider the progressive agents of social control, or agents of social change or social justice? Okay, so key issues for the progressives: ending political corruption. So they want to get rid of these political machines like Boss Tweed, Tammany Hall. They want to see more things done in the open a little bit more. Legislation to fix the problems of industrialization and urbanization, special focus on child labor. Women, again, are a big piece of this. So, especially as more women are becoming educated at schools like Mount Holyoke and things like that, a lot more women getting involved in social work and education. And one of those women is Jane Addams. You definitely need to know her. She is on the AP test every single year. So, she is famous for a settlement house called Hull House, Hull. All right, so who was she? She's famous for building Hull House in Chicago in 1889. She'll win the Nobel Peace Prize for her work. She's a social reformer, a pacifist, and a very active suffragist. We've definitely seen excerpts from her in the past on the AP test, focusing more with this issue with the pacifism, especially around World War One. So just note that she was trying to keep us out of the war. She was inspired by reformers that she met in London. So she's trying to agitate for shorter hours for women workers. So things like Muller v. Oregon, 1908, and making school attendance compulsory. So that would be one way to kind of do an end run around child labor. They can't be working in factories quite so long if they actually have to attend school. In 1910, she'll write her autobiography called 20 Years at Hull House. Again, we see a lot of excerpts from that on the AP test as well. So what is a settlement house? So it's usually for the poor immigrants. You saw a lot of single mothers in settlement houses. So the idea is that you would have access to childcare so that you could work, educational courses. So maybe you don't have to be stuck in this unskilled labor at the factories anymore. So ways to kind of move up in society. It should be noted, however, that there was not a whole lot of respect for, if you were an immigrant, what your culture was, what your language was previously. So the big focus is really going to be on assimilation. So this is seen as a challenge to the political machine bosses as well. It's going to be hard for them to trade for favors if you've got more people working their way up or having more access to childcare and things like that.